Hello again. So we are going to continue the masterclass with the screening of The End of Time. But anyway, we wanted to ask if there is any question or reflection about the broken land. You are welcome to express it.
My question, uh, I'll start it like this. I'm half Slovenian, half Italian. So I was raised in this type of situation, ethnical situation, where I'm part of both nationalities, and it's hard for me to, have a monopoly of one or the other. So what I'm asking, for example, because we saw in the picture that there is these people that are actually people that live on the border, and how was it for you to work with these people and maybe experience their perception of ethnical differences? Yeah, pretty much also racism in certain cases, as we saw. It was interesting because I think maybe it's also the circumstance of the land being a bit, let's say, isolated from civilization, and it seemed to me that the people somehow they tend to auto-convince themselves of a certain moral and of how they act according to it. And I was wondering how you, as a Canadian, being in that land, and maybe also being half Swiss, how did you perceive their perspective of such matter?
For me, a lot of it, what I felt from people was kind of fear of the unknown, and fear of them losing what they were used to having, the threat of being occupied. Um, but it made me very uncomfortable, of course. It's a kind of brutal, well, it's not brutal, but it's an aggressive um, situation to put up this unfriendly barrier. But I also found it really interesting to see how much subtext there was and how this wall, it could block people, but on the other hand, it was just a symbol of blocking people, allowing, as some people suggest, for drug trade to happen, for things to happen. It's sort of that's how complicated things are these days. Like you put up one image, but behind that image, you're doing exactly the opposite of what you're symbolizing. Um, I found it especially uncomfortable. I spent the day with those militia guys, um, and just because of the nature of the numbers of people, I was alone with them a lot in the car, driving long distances and having conversations with them. And I was actually quite surprised that we weren't able to have a real conversation. Every time I would like slightly suggest an altered point of view on something, it just came back like a big wall, and that was pretty annoying. um, but you sort of try to be compassionate and understand why they see their situation that way. They don't feel they're bad people. They feel they're doing the right thing. But I remember there was one time when we were filming at the end of that day after I'd been trying to talk to them all day, and they were setting up to, look through their binoculars to see if they could see someone in the distance. And I just got so tired of listening to them. I pointed to the desert. It's not in the film. I pointed to the desert and started walking away like for half a kilometer. And Luke and Stephanie, the directors and the sound person and the assistant camera, were like, "Where's he going?" And they were all following me, um, walking away. And these guys are like continuing to talk and going, "What the hell's going on?" And that, I mean, in a way, it's sad it's not in the film because it says so much about our relationship to, to some of the subjects that we were encountering and trying to express. I mean, that was an expression with the camera of that. No, it wasn't very difficult. I mean, the directors did an amazing job of preparing it. You know, they had visited, I think, all the people or most of the people before, a year or two before. They had a plan of who we would visit. They didn't have a script, you know, like how the film would be, but they had a plan of subjects. So for me, it was a treat because it was like, okay, we go to this place and you just film, and I got to discover it. But they had it very well organized and prepared, and we did 2 trips.
Can I ask you just, I was really surprised to see that you collaborated with that film because it's completely different from the way you are doing films. So I would like to know, how do you choose which project would you will you take and which not? You know, it's based on who you know. It's the matter of money that you need it and you have to work, or you could try to stick with your vision.
No, I mean I'm aware that when I collaborate with someone else, it's not going to be like a film I would make. Um, but I really enjoy the process of meeting the directors and the subject somewhere, like finding a common ground where I can contribute to what they're doing. And I mean, in the case of this film, yeah, I needed a job. Um, so I was paid, but I also really liked the directors. I just liked them as people. And I liked the subject, and they told me what they were going to do, and they knew my films. They didn't really know how I worked, but I explained how I would propose working, and then we did it. And the strange thing is, it was a kind of dark subject. It was a dark situation, but we had a wonderful time together. Like it was actually fun. But yeah, it's you know it, it's not one of my films, but I think you can sort of see aspects of how I put things together with the camera. You can also see how the sound and some of the editing worked because I was involved in some of that. And Franz Treichler, who did the music, is also the person I'm now doing live shows with. So there's cross-referencing going on everywhere. Time for the end of time. Yes. So what I'm going to show you. We haven't had a lot of time to talk about process and how things are prepared, especially for the documentary films like Gambling Gods and The End of Time, because as I have mentioned, I don't work by script. I work by themes, and I go down a kind of exploratory path in making the film. I discover the film as it's coming together. So what I'm going to show you here is a 10-minute pitch that I did for The End of Time, and you'll see that there's some big evolution happened from the point of what I was setting out to do initially and what the final film became. And so we thought it might be interesting to show it because I'm talking through it and I'm explaining the ideas and the approach of what I think this film in the future will be. And then you'll see the film that came out of it. Magazine's Images of the Year. It reminded me of how photography can freeze the passing of time, whether extraordinary like this or ordinary like most. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to take a moment, any moment, in the life of someone and expand it into an entire film? To examine first by exploring the dimensions of their particular space, and then by reaching outwards to some of the other conditions of the world, taking place at the very same time. It made me think about how relevant each moment really is to the unfolding of our future, how interrelated we actually all are, and how vital it is becoming that we pay more careful attention to how we live in the present for the sake of the future. When I think of time, I think of our time, the era within which we live, and how significant it will be in determining the time of the future. But it also makes me think of the end of time, the end of a certain phase of our evolving consciousness. The consciousness of today will change out of the simple need for survival and preservation of our environment. For me, this change is directly linked to how we see, how we understand nature, not just the environment, but the nature in and of ourselves. As a beginning to the development of this new project, I recently went away to read, write, and collect some images and sounds. I decided to go near the ocean and clouds, a relevant environment to muse on these ideas. I've always been interested in the cycles and pathways of water, and how it travels the globe in its various states of fluid, crystal, and vapor. It seems to me that you can't help but think of the relativity of all that is if you follow the pathways of water. I thought a film that uses clouds as its central binding element might make sense. Often, especially in the cities, clouds and sunlight are the only elements left in our field of vision that are not man-made. And clouds are available to everyone. They are democratic and no one owns them. We can all look at clouds and let our minds wander in our own subjective ways. They are the stuff of dreams, science, poetry, imagination, God, flight, a partner in our existential musings. But clouds too, of course, are not free from the influence of our activities down on the ground. As every action has an effect, so do many of our actions have an effect on the clouds. Pick a cloud and you may find the traces of an explosive war, an incinerator that vaporizes our garbage, a coal burner that heats our homes, or from the natural world, the evaporation of the oceans, burning forests and peat bogs, erupting volcanoes. Even the breath we exhale contributes to the formation of the vapors above that will eventually douse us once again with our most vital of fluids, water. Konrad Lorenz, the famous biologist, once suggested that instead of giving grants to Nobel Prize winners, it might be more fruitful to buy every family's children an aquarium stocked with fish and other life that is its own little ecosystem. This way, he felt that children would learn the relationships of living things to each other, and how they need each other to survive and evolve, thus affecting the way they see things at an early stage in their lives. It is in a similar way that I would hope my new film would function, that in the viewing of the relationships of the clouds above to the people and conditions below, an audience would be led to see and think more by association than by the transmission of didactic information. The storyline would be one that works by demonstrating how one thing affects the next in a dramatic unfolding of action and reaction. Aldous Huxley called it the all in every this. Every single thing has its effect on the next and the next, which ultimately influences the whole. This is as relevant in nature, which in this analogy includes all of our modern trappings and manufacture, as it is in the editing of a film. Every part is relevant to the integration of the cosmos of the whole, the ideas, the cinematography, the rhythms of the edit. Each component contains something like the DNA of the big picture. I would like to think that after people had watched this film, they would one day look up at a cloud and be reminded that in spite of the great acts of destruction of our time, there is always room for a small personal act of greatness. I feel it is vitally important that there has been an emergence of films such as An Inconvenient Truth, Manufactured Landscapes, Darwin's Nightmare, and numerous others. which have all been giving us evidence and documentation of the state of affairs on various points around the globe. I would like to continue on this path, but put the focus on consciousness and perception, with an emphasis on the practice of how we actually see. I'd like to create a film that makes us look and think more deeply into relationships, interrelationships of our own actions to the rest. For example, the implications of the bananas we eat, or of the TV we just turned on. When we are about to eat a banana, we might start to consider where it came from, finding out how much of Ecuador's landscape has been devastated by banana plantations, how people bathe in the pesticide-poisoned rivers around them, how cancer is therefore on the rise, and pharmaceutical companies are vying for a position in the treatment market, and finally, how some free trade agreement is stopping that country from implementing environmental controls. But I don't wish to depict only stories and relationships like that of the banana, but rather use the medium of cinema to work lyrically and associatively on the subconscious by taking the viewer on a meditative ride that engages aspects of their own imagination, intuition, and experience. A film that makes them breathe differently, that lets them see deeply by slightly twisting their perception, like that of a mind-altering drug. While visiting this active volcano, I became aware again of time, and the very age of the earth. Our modern condition has metered time in a way that can restrict our seeing. The pressure to perform and create and achieve in smaller and smaller units of time has effectively hardwired us to our computers. It is becoming more and more of a struggle to break free and see aspects of life that have been skimmed over in our rush to perform. Of course, the media is hugely instrumental in influencing the way we understand and perceive our particular experience. I would hope that this film would make its viewer aware of this, while simultaneously offering an altered language. It's possibly more important now than ever that we take the initiative to become more aware, and this in part needs us to practice different ways of seeing. Back to Lawrence and his aquarium idea. He goes on to say that our perception of what is harmony has been changing as children are born into the construction of cities, suburbs, and ghettos, where the links to natural order have been diminished. One's perception of harmony may now be found in the architecture of a skyscraper, rather than in the life of a forest. The danger here is that if we find our harmony only in the fabricated world, we may end up extinguishing ourselves, as that world is not self-sustaining. It is important to remain aware of the origins that allowed us to build our present conditions in the first place. He went on to make a disturbing comparison, that of a cancer cell viewed under a microscope, as compared to an aerial view of a city. Apparently they contain the same jagged geometric structures, grid patterns of suburbs butting up against city cores without thought of integration. Perhaps this is just a coincidence, but a thought-provoking one nonetheless. As I described in the beginning of this presentation, I am working with seeds. Seeds that will grow through a necessary period of research, intertwining specific subjects, themes, locations, and so on. Growing into a concrete shooting and production strategy, a corresponding budget, and finally a film as a reflection of the experience. In summary, right now, I would say the primary seeds are time, the one we live in, how we perceive it, and how our actions affect the future. Clouds, and their relationship to the activities and events below. Consciousness, and the importance of seeing more deeply through meditation and associative thought. Okay, so we're gonna go right into the film, The End of Time, and you can tell me if this pitch has anything to do with the finished film afterwards.